Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live. It's a pleasure to have you. There's lots going in the world today with the crazy digital revolution taking place. It seems that at least in the US, the world's starting to begin to emerge a little from the COVID cocoon. Lots of good things happening there. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, the business world has continued to cook along as it just seems to be moving in new directions, breaking into new ground, doing new things, innovating relentlessly. So much of that around what's happening in the digital and data world. So we are delighted to have back one of our top monthly guests, Sean Ammirati. Sean is a professor at the business school at Carnegie Mellon, where he helps big companies think like little companies and helps young entrepreneurs think like business people. Sean's a serial entrepreneur himself. He's a venture capitalist, he's an author, and he's a podcaster. So Sean, it's great to have you. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live.
Always fun to be here. Thanks, Bob.
Did I miss anything, Sean?
No, I think that's it. That's it. But
Triathlete.
yeah. Well, not a good one, but recreationally, yes, that's exactly right.
Wonderful. So, Sean, you you have been way out in front on some of this thing about right with that giant company up in Seattle, and I don't mean Microsoft, but the Amazon company. And for a while, you've just been scratching your head and saying, "What in the world are they doing? How can they keep this AWS company locked up in here when there's so much value on the outside?" So, Sean, given the events of the last few days, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think we had to say that maybe I was thinking about this all wrong, which that's I've said for a long time, right? These predictions are as fun to help you think about things as they are actually for accuracy. But for 2 years in a row, so once at the end of 2019 and at the end of 2020, we recorded predictions for 2020 and 2021. And for 2020, I predicted Amazon would spin AWS. That was wrong. And then we doubled down on that prediction again in December of 2020 for a 2021 prediction. And it's funny, you said, which of these are you the most confident in? And I said, definitely Amazon spinning AWS. And the logic is obvious, right? Like, if you're Walmart or you're Kohl's or you're, many industries, as Amazon continues to have a wider and wider purview, including healthcare companies today with, Amazon getting into health insurance, right? In all these different verticals. Do you really want to be sending a check to your competitor? And these are meaningful checks for your infrastructure as a service or for your cloud platform. And the answer is obviously no. And so for me, it just makes tons of sense for AWS to be a standalone entity. But in the twists and turns that are tech communities and our tech leadership, we saw that AWS just promoted its CEO to be the CEO of all of Amazon, and that Jeff Bezos will move up to be executive chairman. Which brings to, maybe we've been thinking about this all wrong point. I'm now beginning to wonder if Amazon won't spin AWS, but will AWS spin this little retail, this sort of annoying retail part of their business called Amazon e-commerce at some point in the next 11 months? So I remain confident that these entities are worth more separate than they are together. And I think actually, from the perspective of Andy, right, he's had to be on the front lines dealing with really the unforced errors of churn that come from companies realizing that they're funding a competitor in the AWS world. He's now in the CEO seat, not just the CEO of AWS seat. And so I continue to believe that it probably makes sense for them to make the argument that the parts are greater than the sum here, right? So, there's a lot of folks, including students of mine, who go make a career on Wall Street and basically learn how to say synergy in windowless conference rooms and make the argument that the parts are worth greater as a sum than they are as parts. I think what we have in the case of Amazon and AWS is that the parts are worth greater than the sum. And I still believe it makes sense to have these be two separate entities, but certainly an amazing development over the last few days at Amazon around that. And also, I think just more generally, just what a recognition that how valuable AWS is to the overall Amazon company, right? There were a lot of different places that you could have imagined promotions into the CEO chair, when the force of nature that Jeff Bezos really is decides to take a step up and move into the executive chairman role and do a number of interesting kind of special projects and the things that a title like that provides you to do. But I think tapping, his former chief of staff, who then spun up this incredibly meaningful unit within Amazon of AWS is a really interesting recognition of how important, how strategic AWS really is to the overall company.
Well, Sean, I still think you're terrific at fortune telling, at crystal balling, and seeing the future. That is pretty crazy, and I love how you twist that around. It's like maybe AWS is going to say, "Hey, you know what? This retail thing, everybody's doing it. There's no big motor on that, but what we're doing is different." Sean, I think I saw in the Amazon financial results that AWS for the fourth quarter, and I think it was also the whole year, accounted for 12% of Amazon's revenue. So to your point there at the end of what you were saying, here you've got, it is by no means the biggest part of the company. In fact, of the three units that they report on, it is by far the smallest. Yet up he goes into the top spot, and recognizing that technology's got plays a part in every business. But as you said, as Amazon moves more and more into a wider range of fields, you've got to have somebody up there who's able to see a very big picture. And like you said, there's got tons of great high level talent at the company. And Bezos picked Jassy. That's pretty wild.
I agree, and I think it's interesting too. Just to double down one moment on how Andy got involved in the company, right? There's this increasingly popular role that you see high growth companies adopt, and it's sort of adopted. It's not that they invented it, but bringing this role in much earlier to organizations of these chief of staff roles, right? And Reid Hoffman, who most of your audience will know, was an early proponent in the tech community of the importance of putting a chief of staff in the executive suite who could help the CEO and some of the other senior leaders do that. And that was really how Andy Jassy got his introduction to Amazon. He literally just shadowed Jeff Bezos everywhere, taking notes, following up on action items, sort of being this force multiplier on Jeff Bezos's time. Right. And I think for his perspective, and I have a number of my MBA students who go and take these roles in different companies. I think the interesting thing is shadowing a CEO in this sort of apprentice-like model is just an incredible way to learn the culture, learn the management style, learn the tools and techniques, right? And then he jumps into this really meaty project, which ultimately doesn't work out, then jumps into AWS, which obviously becomes a behemoth within the company. And to your point, small on a revenue basis, but I would argue like strategically punches way above the 11% range, right? So it's really interesting. It's going to be an interesting year. I think we said that at the beginning of last year, and we didn't have any idea what we were saying. Hopefully this is an interesting year on the business front. And as you said, we're less so on the health and some of these other fronts.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're on the downside of that, but it's going to be really fascinating to watch how Amazon shakes out with this new leadership structure for sure.
Sean, can I ask, since you brought up the thing about this emerging significance of the chief of staff role, if I was the chief operating officer at a company and the CEO picked a dynamo young chief of staff, should I be worried or nervous? Say, hey, isn't that my job to make sure that what you lay out gets done?
So I think they're different. I think they're different roles, right? And a lot of people draw upon like even if you don't know much about politics, probably watching like West Wing and stuff, you've seen this chief of staff in the executive branch of government, right? And the idea is that they're not. I think of a COO as the person who runs the operations of the business. And if I'm the CEO, I'm saying to my COO, I don't want you in every meeting with me, right? I want you in meetings without me, making the trains run on time, fixing operational problems, making sure our supply chain works well, making sure reporting, data, analytics are in line, right? There's a bunch of sort of internal operational things that I want you to take care of. I need to sort of straddle the line between that and the external things. And what I'm doing with this chief of staff is I'm putting somebody who can effectively just be a force multiplier on my time. So I don't think of it as a competitor with the COO. The way I think about it, and what I've now this role has been increasingly popular since Reed started blogging about it, and I think demonstrated some good success with it. As I've watched my students go and take these roles, what you tend to see them do is it's kind of a 18 to 24 month rotational position, right? Like you do it for 18 to 24 months. And towards the back end of that, you start looking at interesting projects and then jump into one of them. So maybe it's a product management role for something more innovative. Maybe it's more of a transformational initiative within the company. Maybe it's just a GM of a business unit. But it's sort of like you don't typically stay at the C-suite after that. You typically move down the organization, but to something where instead of your purview is kind of a force multiplier on somebody else's time, it's like you are now driving that initiative within the organization.
All right. All right. And Sean, I wanted to ask you one other thing about, as you've reflected here some on students in your class moving into these sorts of roles. And also, sometimes the sort of the cliche of MBA students sitting in a windowless conference room, learning how to say synergy about everything. A company where I used to work, one of the family members of the family that owned the company, he loved to say this. And I think he had a quote. He had to say it at least 6 times a day, which is, we have to make sure 2 and 2 doesn't equal 4, 2 and 2 equals 5. And I don't know. Am I missing something there, Sean? Because that drove me crazy.
That's the advanced version of saying synergy, Bob. See, when you add some numbers to it, it's amazing. It's amazing what you can do. But let me translate that for our friends at Amazon right now. 2 and 2 doesn't equal 5. 2 and 2 doesn't even equal 4. 2 and 2 equals like 2.5. And the problem is when 2 and 2 is going to equal 2, you've got a big problem on your hands, boys. And so we'll see. We'll see what happens. I do think that this shakeup makes the concept of these two being broken apart more likely, but certainly it's hard to imagine Andy becomes the CEO of Amazon and then spins off his baby. So maybe the reverse is where we're heading here.
Sean, I'll say one last thing about Andy Jassy and Amazon and this whole transition. Whoever's going to succeed him as CEO at AWS, I mean, the track record, the performance of that company has just been astonishing, right? Category creator, the king of it, innovated a lot. But been to a lot of conferences like a lot of people. I have never seen anybody give 3-hour keynotes where by like minute 50 or 60, the room's half empty, 2 hours into it, there's hardly anybody. And there'd be a lot of people would say, what are you doing? Nobody will possibly stay through that. But he managed to turn something unheard of that I think a lot of people would be afraid of, but he turned it into a real event within the event, which is, what the heck is he going to talk about for 2.5 or 3 hours? That is rather remarkable for a CEO to be able to get in there. But I think it was part of that magic he created within AWS.
I think that's a great example. And I think on that level, he's borrowing from consumer tech, right? Like, there is another company, little south of them in Cupertino that has been doing those kind of keynotes for a long time, right? Mm-hmm. But to do that in the enterprise tech space, right? In some ways, it's a continuation of this consumerization of IT in terms of consumerization of messaging and things like that. But I think to your meta point, whoever takes that role, and I don't think that's been announced yet. If it has, I missed it. But whoever takes that role, I think there's 2 things that are true, right? One, an incredible, career-defining opportunity, right? You really have the chance to shape arguably one of the most, if not the most important industries for the next 3 to 4 years from a business perspective. Again, to be clear, I've said many times, nobody wants a business school's perspective on epidemiology. So I understand there are more important issues in the world at large than cloud computing. But in terms of business and how people deliver value to customers and make money, it's hard to think of a more important industry than the cloud computing industry, right? And I think Andy's successor has an amazing opportunity to figure out how you go from where they are to where they want to be, because um, it's an incredible story along all dimensions, but we all know Wall Street values growth, not just results. And one of the things that's just true in business in general is the law of large numbers. It gets hard to continue to grow the bigger and bigger your base becomes. As part of what makes Apple, speaking of that company, so magical, is that the results they've put up on top of amazing bases is truly incredible.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Sean, so I wanted to ask you about, um, in some ways, not the realm where Amazon started, but you think about a company that got into the tech business by filling a need that its original parent Amazon had. Right, we got to crank up for the holiday season, handle the surges of data, create new database tools and technologies that are able to meet these certain needs of us. So there's been, over the last year, certainly, or more than a year, but it's really come to the surface, seems to be in the last few months, this thing around cloud databases.
Right.
And my good friend, contributing editor here at Cloud Wars, John Foley, is starting uh, a new property called the Cloud Database Report. And one of the things that John, in the early stages of this, has done, he put together 10 really interesting, dynamic pieces that have taken place just in the month of January. And a couple of those were, I think it was Databricks, yeah, with close to $1 billion in funding, and the wonderfully named Cockroach landing $160 million. So, Sean, those are big. I don't have to. Those are pretty big numbers. So,
Those are big
what
numbers.
is it that people are seeing in this cloud database market that's leading to these, incredibly big infusions?
Yeah, I mean, Databricks, right? It closed $1 billion of funding at a $28 billion valuation,
Wow.
which
Whew.
which I think, just going back to our conversation in December, might make Snowflake look cheap on the public markets all of a sudden.
Hey, Sean, that's a great point. And that reminds me, I want to offer a word from our sponsor, BMC. BMC wants to know, is your business on its A game? That's when systems are intelligent by learning from markets, where automation is paramount yet effortless, and when technology and people work as one in an enterprise. The A game is your business at its absolute best. BMC calls this the autonomous digital enterprise. Find out more at bmc.com/A game.
So I don't know. It's interesting to watch how fast this is evolving, right? But yeah, I think that what you're seeing in general, and we've talked about the strategic importance of data and turning data into information and insights, and the machine learning and data science and analytics that are required to do that, right? And I think even just your recognition within the Cloud Wars platform to create this vertical around the importance of data and the strategic kind of impetus behind that, right? Like that's because I think of exactly this horizontal trend across industries, right? Which is, okay, good, we're able to create a data lake or a data swamp, depending on how good the project goes, but we're able to create a data something. We can aggregate this now, let's drive insights from it. And I think if you sort of look at where this market goes from here, it's going to be really important to drive business value from these data projects, right? And there's a bunch of vendors competing with it. In the same time where I said Amazon will definitely spin AWS this year, I did mention that I was fairly confident that the Cloud Wars top 10 would have Snowflake in it by the end of the year. I didn't realize IBM was going to make that such an easy prediction, but I do feel good now that the Cloud Wars 9 is missing a 10th, and Snowflake should jump right in there and fill that spot. But it's the same thing, right? It's just, this is a really important topic, and in the same way that Amazon's revenue is a small percent of the total market, but of their total revenue, it's 11% of their total revenue, but it's strategically a really important percent of that revenue, so it kind of punches above its weight. I would argue that what you're going to see in the next 12 months is that aggregating data and driving business insights behind that, while still a small part of the overall cloud market from a revenue perspective, from an enterprise value perspective, and from a what are the C-suite talking about, it's going to drive a disproportionate amount of attention and enterprise value over the next 12 months.
Yeah, and Sean, within that, there's the rising, the young stars here that are coming up. You've mentioned a couple of them. John Foley with his cloud database report is, going to have a list of probably about 20 companies. I think he's actually going to rank the top 10 in which he thinks most important. So you have, in some ways, incumbents like Oracle, and Oracle is looking at all these specialized database players, and Oracle's sort of, the same thing. They got a whole lot of chips. They're pushing them all into the middle of the table and said, we think the converged approach, the one database that does everything you could ever want is going to handle it all, and betting against the other guys who are saying, no, 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 digital businesses are going to need one sort of database for this and one for this and one for this. So do you have thoughts, Sean, on this looming battle here about the database strategy, all in one versus built, purpose built?
Yeah. So I think it's a really interesting technology question, but I think it's respectfully like the wrong question that actually drives the decision, right? So to me, um, is it 21 or 22C? It's 20 some number C that is Oracle's converged database, right? It's 20 something. But anyways, like with that strategy, right, which I think is interesting. Like to me, like that's like the features but not the benefits conversation. I used to work with a guy in one of my early startups in sales, and every day he would walk in and he would say the same thing. This was sort of his 2 + 2 = 5 quote. He would every day remind me, he'd say, Sean, every year millions of people go to Home Depot to buy drill bits. Nobody wants a drill bit. What they want is a hole. Right. To me, like a conversation about 21C is all, and is this going to be confers, or is this going to be fragmented, or are we going to do best breed? Like at some point in the conversation, that becomes really important. But that becomes really important in the sort of how are we going to do it? I think that what you're going to see is you're going to see CEOs basically have their own version of that conversation with their IT groups, which is I don't really care which kind of drill bit you need, but we better actually start drilling some holes to make these conversations we've been having for years, and the money I've been spending on building a data moat or building a data lake or building a data swamp or building a data or whatever the case may be, right? I want to start getting business value from it. Now, if I were Oracle, and this is reckless speculation from the outside, right? I'm sure there's a lot I don't know, and I have friends there who may tell me you don't know what you're talking about afterwards. That's fine. But if I were Oracle, right, I'd stop talking about that and I'd start talking about, hey, we've been your business partner for years. We've spun up vertical solutions that can deliver business value, whether you're in healthcare IT or you're in retail or you're in whatever. And our expertise versus Cockroach Labs or so is that we have this holistic view of how your business works. And we've been doing this for years, guys. Like this is not new for us. We started with the world's greatest relational database from our perspective. They probably would leave that last part out, but this is Oracle. So they'd say the world's greatest relational database. And they put you on a private plane with Jeff or with Larry Ellison to actually deliver that message. But the world's greatest, right? And then we built an ERP package on top of that, right? And look at what that did for Oracle. And then we helped you have the same business. Like the problem, the value proposition at the C-suite was not a great relational database. The value proposition at the C-suite is we can take that data and change how your business runs to make it better, faster, allow you to delight customers in new ways. And we've gotten to a point, we've been talking about this for a while, where all of a sudden this one horizontal solution doesn't work. It's the vertical stacks on top of it. And I think Oracle's well positioned there. But I would, again, and I'm not saying there aren't people doing this, but I hear more and more about the how Oracle's approaching that and less about the why and the strategy behind it and the benefits you get from it. and just again respectfully from the outside looking in, I think that's the wrong conversation. You know, the companies that I invest in are much smaller, but I wouldn't even want to talk to my CEOs about which data approach they're going to want to take, right? I want to talk to my CEOs about how are they going to use the investments we're making to deliver more revenue, to delight our customers more, to save money, all of these kinds of problems. And I think Oracle has a great story there, as do some other people in the space. But it just feels like um, they've gotten caught up in letting somebody else drive the narrative, which is, and again, this is just from where I sit, but it's actually quite surprising given the history and the acumen that that team has around these topics. Um, One of the things I think that's really interesting when you think about kind of strategically how different players in a market talk about it is if you can control the narrative and you can get people talking about the narrative in the way that you want to, right? Then you can kind of frame for your customers how they're going to evaluate these options and then use that framing to make sure that you win, right? So, um, you know, if you think about athletic shoes, to make this not a tech example, right? If Nike can frame the conversation in a certain way so that people are like, oh, I really need, you know, this running shoe that allows me to run a 4-minute marathon, even though, I can't run a 12.
Mhm.
I can't run or I can't run or sorry, a 2-hour marathon. But even though I can't even run a 4-hour marathon, right? But if they can change that, then I'm walking into the running store and I'm like, well, I want a running shoe with a carbon plate in it, like the guy who broke that, right? Because Nike has driven that conversation around that. I think with a lot of these kind of new companies entering the data market, they're doing a great job kind of framing the conversation one way. And you're seeing some of the legacy companies sort of take the bait and respond. And it's crazy because, like, look, $1 billion of capital on a $28 billion valuation is a lot, but that's still tiny relative to the established companies on your data list.
Yeah. Yeah, Sean, it's a great point, and I know I was looking at it from not the features of the database converge versus these purpose built, but to achieve the new uh, desired business outcomes in the digital world. Are we getting to a point where those uh, various purpose built ones can do it? But I think you make a great point there. I wanted to also say, about the way that companies position and frame themselves. I saw something the other day about an event uh, that Oracle's doing. I think it's in the middle of this month, February 15th, maybe. But one of the speakers they had listed, there was a guy named Rob Tarkoff, who's an executive vice president. And up until, I would say, 2 or 3 days ago, Rob Tarkoff was the executive vice president for Oracle's CX business.
Mm-hmm.
But the title they had listed for him for this February 15th event is, I think it is Vice President of Advertising and CX. So in Larry Ellison's last live thing where he and Rob Tarkoff had a fireside chat, Larry was going through all the stuff their CX could do. He said, our thing, he said, everybody else's helps managers manage pipeline. He said, our CX stuff actually helps you sell more. And as he was going through that, he said, then the buyer gets this. Well, we are able, with our application, to spin up an ad that pops up in front of him. So I believe this is true, unless I dreamed this and I'm substituting this for reality. But so in a matter of a couple of weeks, Larry Ellison says, Rob, your title should be advertising and CX, because that's where this thing is headed. That's where the money and the opportunity is going to be. So I think you're absolutely right when you describe this notion of, and I think sometimes a Gulliver and the Lilliputians and, tying ropes around somebody, because yeah, if you choose to be defined by the other person's narrative, then either shame on you, or go ahead, you chose the game, play by the rules of that game, don't complain about it.
That's right. Well, it's actually what's really fun about working with startups in general, right? Is whether it's a corporate startup or a traditional startup, like you can get in and you can kind of redefine the landscape and then watch how how that
Yeah.
allows you to get new customers. But it'll be fun. It's going to be fun. And you know, I've known John for a long time. It's really awesome to have him part of the Cloud Wars platform and drilling into this important topic over the future here.
Sean, thank you. Thank you. Great stuff. Great stuff. So living in the Northeast as I do, I don't want to ask this because we've been friends a long time. I will ask it. How is the weather in Florida?
It's cold today for Florida. It's, you know, it's a cold 58 here.
58.
So, yeah.
You going to be okay?
You see, I have a sweatshirt on to try to make it through here, but yeah.
Right. All right, Sean, I'm sending along all the sympathy you deserve for that.
I appreciate it.
And Sean, as always, it's a blast talking with you. You've got such good, insights on things in the future. So you heard it here first, everybody. Sean Ammirati says that AWS will spin out Amazon in this coming year.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bob.
Sean, thanks a million. And folks, thanks to all of you for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. We look forward to seeing you next time.